55-year-old Johnny Williams departed Sumter Municipal Airport with his Cessna 182, ready and fueled for his weekly business trip to Raleigh Airport. Johnny had 14 years of pilot experience under his belt. He was a certified pilot instructor with no instrument rating and 1,500 hours overall. 180 of those hours came from his multi-engine, with 220 from an actual instruments and 35 hours of simulated instrument time. Unfortunately, due to his hard-working nature, he suffered a heart attack at the age of 35, and the FAA disapproved of his medical renewal due to his heart condition, and he was denied of any reinstatement for a medical certificate. He had a habit of mixing alcohol with VFR flying, which he piled over 3,000 hours over the next 15 years without his medical license. The day of the incident, there was a VFR condition and a chance of thunderstorms in the afternoon. He took off early in the morning from Sumter's runway 22 and reported northeast heading. He arrived at Raleigh-Durham International Airport after an hour and a half later. After a busy day at work, Mr. Williams arrived back at Raleigh-Durham Airport. The weather had broken clouds at 4,500 and some thunderstorm activity building and dissipating around the region of south of Charlotte. Without finding a flight plan, Johnny departed off at Raleigh-Durham International to a heading of 215 degrees at 2,500 feet. He opened his full flask and popped a blood pressure tablet he forgot to take. 50 miles northeast of Sumter, Johnny progressively had to keep dodging rain showers, and according to the flight followers, he had a harder time communicating as time progressed. He switched over to Sumter Approach without switching off from the ATC and requested vectors to the airport. Sumter Approach was unable to locate Johnny as he forgot to mention he was 50 miles away. As weather was moving in, Johnny reported heavy rainfall at his 2 o'clock position. He decides to divert to Clarendon Airport and Manning that was off to the east from the storm. At a heading of 195 degrees, he flew over Huggins Memorial Airport at Timmonsville towards Manning. As Johnny approached the town of Manning, he could see a wall of cells right over where the airport was located. Deciding it was too dangerous, he requested vectors to the alternate. The first alternate was Florence and the second was Sumter. Without a doubt, he opted to go back to Sumter. As such, the controller provided vectors to a 350 degrees towards the field. The storm covered the 182, and powerful turbulence in the rain threw the 182 to the bottom of the cell, almost inverted. Frightened and angered, Johnny reconfigured the plane and landed on the field. The plane sustained $33,000 in damages, and Johnny got a couple of bruises and scrapes. The whole issue of assessing blame for an accident has taken on distorted proportions. It starts with the underlying premise that something mechanical or human had to be at fault whenever an airplane gets busted up, and the emphasis is always on the someone, usually the pilot, without even considering the circumstances can occasionally be completely beyond everyone's control. Our unforeseeable FARs are a good example of what I'm talking about. No one at any of the government agencies likes the present situation, but we're stuck living with it. I can tell you, it can be very disheartening dealing with a flagrant violator knowing that if push comes to a shove, the violator is going to win. And the frightening as hell realizing a menace that a person can be in an airplane, sharing the sky with the airline, and thousands of unwary pilots who expect everyone else to be as responsible and as conscientious as they are. You know, on the highway, you have assurances that there are enforced laws to restrain those crazies, the drunks, the speeders, and the people without driver's licenses. We don't have those kinds of enforcements or enforceable laws in aviation, and the people who cause the problems are the first ones to find out how powerless we are, and which encourages them to flaunt the rules and put themselves and everyone else in danger. That's exactly what happened in this case. The pilot had open heart surgery and lost his medical, meaning that he also lost his pilot's license and his flying privileges. He appealed for his reinstatement, was refused, felt he was treated unfairly, and then decided the hell with it. He'd fly until he got caught and deal with it then. But he never did get caught, or if he did, nothing ever came out of it. As a result of whatever took place, he found out pretty quickly that it wouldn't make one goddamn difference, except maybe with his insurance company, and he figured his lawyer brother could probably deal with them. So off he went, and He took off anytime and to any place he felt like going. He also abused the system with impunity. Flight service briefings, flight following, flight watch, and approach control when it suited him. Otherwise, he just barged into the open skies like he owned them without regard for anybody. So on your blame scorecard, chalk up the big one for the system, and that couldn't keep this guy on the ground where he belonged. But that's only part of the accident. Mostly it was the weather and those thunderstorm cells and jumped on him. The National Weather Services never called him, so when he called the flight service for a briefing, they didn't tell him that VFR was not recommended that day because at that time there were no warnings in effect, which means that when he took off, he had the best, most current weather data available. Score 1, no blame point for the pilot. En route, he was discourteous at worst, but otherwise competent. I'm not talking about his drinking, which is unthinkable at the least. That's another story. He flew his route well, maintained his altitude perfectly, and made all the right decisions when he ran into the weather. Remember, the first thing he did was to divert to his alternate, which he didn't hesitate or try plunging into the clouds first to see how bad they were. No, he turned and ran, which is exactly what he should have done on a VFR trip. By the way, having the alternate up his sleeve and at the ready is an example of an excellent planning, better than we see in many VFR situations. Some IFR ones too give the pilot two more points for the en route portion. When his alternate blew up on him, he again made the right decision. He called in and asked for the help. Choosing the Sumter over Florence was a matter of convenience. The controller never pushed one over the other, and the radar tape showed that he made a perfect turn to his assignment heading and held his altitude at 2,500 feet, right on the money. Give him another point for the alternate switch. Then came the best part. The tumble and recovery after being thrown out of the storm cell inverted. Both eyewitnesses verified the inverted part, by the way, otherwise we wouldn't have believed the pilot's story. Not a chance in hell. Not the way he lied about everything else. The part was real. He made a near perfect recovery, inverted in his condition no less, and then he had the presence of mind to put the airplane down and not mess with the weather that could have killed him if he tried. He even called in his intentions to the approach controller while he circled a couple of times looking for the best possible place to land, which he did found. The only problem was that he landed according to the wind instead of according to the field conditions, but that was probably just bad luck. It was raining pretty hard and he may not have been able to see well ahead enough. So I say score a big home run for the pilot for the last part. He did everything right, and the proof is in the fact that he lived to tell about it. I consider to be a miracle unto itself. The man was dead drunk and on pills besides. He survived something the most stone cold VFR and IFR pilots would have not have, simply. How he did that, we'll never know, but he must have had the constitution of a Mack truck. There is one final point of blame. It's his family, and maybe throw the FBO in with him. They knew that he was an alcoholic and he had serious heart problems, the kind of heart problems that you can drop dead from in a heartbeat. And he was breaking the law every time he got into an airplane, in the left seat of an airplane. Yet they not only didn't try to stop him or report him to anybody who could, they actually covered for him and encouraged him to keep on doing it. In effect, they were sending a lethal weapon into the skies, a drunken heart attack candidate. So, if you're looking for what and who to blame for this one, I vote for the weather and the pilot's family. As for the pilot, if anything, his performance was either lucky as hell or impressive as hell. Personally, I'd vote for lucky.
If saw the written reports this pilot submitted the day after the accident, We believe he was still drunk, or thinking we were. There were more discrepancies than there were facts. On one hand, he had over 5,000 hours, but he had no logbook and wrote on the report that he had hardly flown in the last year or so. He said he had lots of multi-engine and actual instrument time, but he had no rating of either of those. He also said he had lots of multi-engine and actual instrument time, but he had no rating of either of those. He even said he had 20 or 30 hours of hood and simulator time, but then admitted he had never taken an I-4 course anywhere, which meant that all of his experiences were claims that were baloney. Everything else was probably the same too. The first thing our investigators noticed when they got to the wreckage, an hour or so after the accident, was a strong smell of whiskey in the cabin. He must have had a bottle with him that either broke or got spilled when the gear broke off. They never found a bottle or any other physical evidence of it, but they reported that the odor was strong and pungent. It was definitely alcohol for sure, and that was later proven by the toxicology reports that came in. The pilot's blood alcohol content was greater than more than 4 times the legal limit. With that much alcohol in his body, it was a wonder how he even ever got off the ground at Raleigh. As you can see, it eventually caught up to him, as it usually does. We pulled the pilot's medical file from OK City, and it was a Lulu. He had open heart surgery 15 years prior to the accident, and several minor episodes afterwards. He was on blood pressure and blood thinner medication, and never did get a clean bill of health from any of his own doctors. In fact, his family internist filed him on showed that he was an alcoholic and had been for many years. But he still appeared for the FAA waiver every couple of years, like he was trying to prove something. I don't know what, but because he continued to fly anyways. Having no medical and invalid pilot's license didn't seem to bother him much. He probably treated everything else in his life the same way. And you wonder what he must have told his insurance company in order to collect anything on the airplane he piled up. They don't usually pay off when there's a medical missing or alcohol involved. That, by the way, was the crazy issue in the accident. Everyone who got anywhere near the pilot testified he was too drunk or even to even stand up by himself. But the first blood test showed 0 alcohol, and the second one, which showed a very high blood alcohol content level, showed somehow it got lost for more than a week at the hospital lab. We checked to see if there's had been any little hanky-panky going on because the pilot's sister-in-law was a nurse, but you couldn't prove anything. In general, the guy was sort of a flying time bomb. It was just lucky he didn't crash into a schoolyard or a shopping center. After the whole thing was over, we found out he was back flying about 6 weeks later. No medical and still drinking. We notified the state police about it, but they said they couldn't do anything to stop him. His airplane was owned by his family business, so we couldn't impound it for substance abuse. And we have no way of finding him or arresting him for not having a medical. The FARs don't provide for penalties. That's also true for his license and the ratings he doesn't have. We sent him a couple of notices and a threatening letter, but I'm sure that after so many years of ignoring the rules, he just laughed at us and did all the flying he wanted to. There's nothing else we can do. It's a lousy situation that needs to be changed. We haven't figured out a way how or what to start with. Every state has its own laws and expects us to do our own policing, but we don't have a police force. We're just dead in the water until someone else figures out how to give us a set of teeth to make our own rules to stick. In the meantime, we've been pretty lucky. There aren't a lot of Johnny Williams out there flying airplanes.
The blood sample drawn from the pilot contained traces of tenormin, a substance contained in a common blood pressure prescription drug. Although the percent level in the blood proved to be insignificant, the flight can alter the effects of medication. Since tenormin has not been tested for high altitude uses, the side effects are unknown. During different circumstances, the user could experience conditions such as hypoxia, hypothermia, vibration, high g-forces, complex multi-axis movements, fatigue, boredom interspersed with periods of intense concentration and sensory overload, turbulence, and disorientation. All prescribed medication must be approved by the Civil Aviation Authority or Civil Aviation Medical Examiner. Any over-the-counter drugs or herbal remedies unapproved by the examiner should be treated and used as if they were alcohol. If uncertainty exists, aircrew are responsible to contact an aviation medicine department to confirm if their medication is approved for use. Fortunately, the atenolol or tenormin tablet Johnny Williams used are one of the generally accepted medication for aviation personnel. However, it should be noted that some serious side effects of this drug includes dizziness, depression, swelling, lightheadedness, nausea, and mild shortness of breath.
Johnny Williams had a blood alcohol content of 0.17%. This will usually show signs of emotional instability, loss of critical judgment, impairment of memory and comprehension, decreased sensory response, and mild muscular disorientation. Ideally, total avoidance of alcohol should be a key element in planning or accomplishing a flight. Alcohol avoidance is as critical as developing a flight plan, a good pre-flight inspection, obeying ATC procedures, and avoiding severe weather. It is best to allow at least 24 hours between the last drink and takeoff time. Alcohol is selectively concentrated by the body into certain areas and can remain in the fluid of the inner ear even after all traces of alcohol in the blood have disappeared. This accounts for the difficulty and balance that is experienced in a hangover. Even small amounts of alcohol, like 0.05% or lower, have been shown in simulators to reduce piloting skills. The effect of alcohol and hypoxia is addictive, and at 6,000 feet ASL, the effect of one drink is equivalent to 2 drinks at sea level. The body metabolizes alcohol at a fixed rate of 1/3 to 1/2 ounce per hour, and no amount of coffee, medication, or oxygen will alter this rate. As a minimum, all pilots should adhere to all the guidelines of FAR 91.17 in the United States. The FAR 91.17 states that no person may act or attempt to act as a crew member of a civil aircraft within 8 hours of having consumed alcohol, while under the influence of alcohol, with a blood alcohol content of 0.04% or greater, and while using any drugs that adversely affect safety. Along with communication issues, a string of bad luck and judgment proved to be detrimental factors to this flight. Not only was he drinking alcohol, he was also medically unfit to fly. He had serious life-threatening heart problems, which required him to take blood-thinning medication. Although his blood sample tested the traces of his medication proved harmless, unknown side effects may occur at high altitudes due to different atmospheric conditions. With the support of Johnny's family and no one to really enforce the rules on him, he basically flew anywhere and everywhere he wanted while under influence. Johnny abused the system and used flight service briefings, flight following, flight watch, and approach controls to his desire. Most importantly, the accumulation of spontaneous Carolina thunderstorms trapped Johnny from his alternate airports. He diverted to 2 airports but was unable to succeed as the storm started blocking his destination with powerful turbulence and rain that even inverted his plane. It is arguable how bad his choices were for his alternate airport. He chose convenience over practicality, knowing that the storms were coming in from the west. Unfortunately, Sumter approach didn't specify just how much of a risk it was to divert to Sumter Airport. But seeing as how Sumter was Johnny's desired destination anyways, it wasn't even worth thinking about. However, even with his impairment, Johnny was still able to fly the airplane just fine. He selectively made the right decision to divert, and he flew at the correct altitudes and route, heading well. Even as the wall of thunderstorm cells surrounded him and his plane became inverted, he was able to recover from this position and successfully landed on the field. However, even with his impairment, Johnny was still able to fly the plane just fine. He selectively made the right decision to divert, and he flew at the correct altitudes and route heading well. Even as the wall of thunderstorm cells surrounded him and his plane became inverted, he was able to recover from the position and successfully landed on a field. He made the right decision that any sober pilot would have taken if they encountered such bad weather. If anything, Johnny probably flew the plane better than most sober pilots would have.